right. All set. Thank you. So it's been actually at least a couple of weeks or more since there's a meeting, and so just a kind of do a brief recap where things have gone. We had been going through and at one point looking at some design docs for a common CRD, and there was some really good discussion, and I was I had volunteered, or actually I think I missed the meeting. I was volunteered to do it, to put those docs together. And so I was going through and just looking at the various operator projects to borrow from those and try to take the best of what they have to offer. And there was really good discussion, but I think then I felt like we had kind of reached a point needed to move things further, deeper discussions, hopefully, and start moving towards code. And of course, and that's been kind of the big elephant in the room of, you have multiple projects where they're polished and kind of how to proceed without stepping on anyone's toes. So I decided to put out, start I'll call it prototype proof of concept project, not with the intention of reinventing work that's already done across several operator projects, but rather to see if kind of just cast a line and see if anyone would, bite to say, well, let me, just to get involved. And if, and not surprisingly, it really hadn't happened, and I hadn't put a ton of time and effort into it. And so I put an email out on the dev list last night, just wanting to kind of see what people think should do. So let me just start with the questions I put on the dev list, which is, first and foremost, do people think that it's still worthwhile to try to have a community-based operator project, whether that lands in ASF or elsewhere? And I'll turn it over to others to chime in on that.
Hey,
thanks.
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in from my perspective. So I'm new here, obviously. Hi, Andy. I work at Apple on our Cassandra SRE team, and as you guys may have known, we had some other members of our team in earlier meetings who talked about that we use Cassandra on Kubernetes at Apple, and we are not currently doing an operator. And we have a lot of interest in pursuing using one or writing one or whatever. And we did a little internal demo of CassCop, and we were like really impressed by the user experience and how we were just able to just provision resource definition, make an upgrade by changing the image, and scale up and scale down very easily. It's like these are operations that would be very complex with our tooling as it is. So we're very interested in being part of this in a way, and I think it being an Apache project would make it a lot easier for us to be involved and contribute. So that's kind of the 2 cents I wanted to add there. In terms of how that happens, I'm coming in with fresh eyes, so I don't have a lot of the context, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks for joining, Andy, and thanks for replying on the mailing list and discussing on Slack earlier. And yeah, that's great feedback. Cyril, do you want to offer? Do you have any? I know we've chatted some about this, but great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we think so. As one of the main contributors of CUP for Andy, I don't know if he knows who are the actors here. Yeah, we think it makes sense to converge to an operator that could be, that could support all the features that we needed in our case, why CASCOP was built, and make it maybe simpler and like we said in the past, extendable if we need so, like being able to change the backup, restore storage, all those different components from the operator. So I think it makes sense. We, like Frank emphasized it, yeah, of course we would think that it would be simpler to start with something that exists and maybe change it, but it depends what we are, where we're going, and how we want to, change it. Sometimes it's better to start from scratch, but it depends. Of course, we put a lot of sweat in that one, so yeah, we are biased for sure.
And Andy, since you're new, I think that's part of one of the challenges we've been trying to navigate. The people that have worked on the respective projects, understandably so, yeah, they put in a lot of hard work and effort, and so there's, like Cyril said, some bias towards the work they've done, which is understandable. They're all great projects and bring a lot of interesting features. Let me go down the line. So Raul, you want to go next?
Yeah. Hey, welcome, Andy. Yeah, I kind of mentioned this before, and then some of the articles that we collaborated on and published. I think my sentiment is that if there's a community-based operator, it's the same question that's like somebody's asking about the official Docker image, right, for Cassandra. And it's just better to know that the group that makes Cassandra is also kind of certifying that there's an operator that works, and it's the official one. Now, in terms of who made it, where the code came from, I personally don't care. It doesn't really matter. I'm a user complainer on this end, and being a user complainer, how it works and how it works well for me is one aspect of it, and a second aspect of it is, can I tell somebody on my team or a client, for example, to say, oh yeah, there's a Cassandra operator, like the one operator, that's just where I'm coming from. It's just easier canonically just to tell people about it than to say, oh, there's 5 operators. Pick one.
Yeah, I've run into that as well. Chris, you want to chime in?
I don't have anything really big to add here, but that hasn't already been said. We're all working on operators, and obviously it would be really awesome for the project if we had something that was not just a toy, very robust, ready to use, and to run with. And I think there's a lot of work that's been done in a number of spaces. I don't need to rehash the wheel here. So it's pretty clear. And I think it's to our advantage as a community to have that unified view, that unified front.
Can I add one more thing? One of the basis of the premises why we started to work on the operator was because we wanted to be able to set up a cluster really fast, and also because of all the issues that we had on prod caused by user interactions with the cluster, and to enforce some specific optimized maybe settings, but also methods or ways to operate the cluster, follow the right procedure and not, not shut down. I mean, there are many things that we are also thinking about, like what we do if a node is down for more than 3 hours, and could the operator do something without us knowing, things like this. So we are trying to simplify all the operations regarding Cassandra. It's not easy, but that was the goal of creating the operator.
Your example of a node is down more than 3 hours. That's one of the things that we have automation around this that's external, but like maybe it doesn't always work, or like it's on the outside. So like it makes a lot more sense for it to be in the scope of an operator where it can detect, oh, hey, this pod is crashed or whatever, it needs to be rescheduled, and hey, we need to do it in a safe way. Things can change IPs and all that kind of stuff. So like there's a lot of opportunity for a person themselves screwing it up that hopefully you could encode that all into an operator and make it less of something that someone has to have the opportunity to screw up, right? So that's a big win that we see with an operator on our side.
I just noticed that Frank had replied to the email as well on the dev list, and I'll make sure to reply on there to him as well. And one of the things as far as my role in this, it started off from just a casual observer to just wanting to be involved in it any way that I can. So I should point out, I am neither a member of the Apache, the member of the PMC, nor am I a core team member on what people work on CASCOP or on any of the other operator projects. I've contributed to some, but so I'm just a active, enthusiastic community member with no weight or authority. So I agree that, unfortunately, I agree. A community-based solution is great. Like Raul said, seeing that something that it's a sub project. I mean, it's people see it. It's almost like some validation that it provides. But I feel like, we just continue to spin our wheels here, and I'm not sure a good path forward. Hey, Jim.
Yeah, I was going to comment on is that I think when you said good path forward, I was thinking about what is the MVP for the Cassandra community to say, I think its outcome is a very intelligent level 5 operator, right? The eventual goal is level 5 operator. What is level 0? And level 0 with 5 operators is not possible. You got to start with one place. And I think what I think about level 0 should be okay, this is how you do Cassandra on Docker, and then this is how you do Cassandra with Kubernetes. Here's an example. And maybe it's very meta. And then we say, here's references to the 5, right? That's what I imagine is level 0. Even that would be better than you Google Cassandra on Kubernetes and there's different ways of doing it,
Well, I think John was doing that. He did a really good job of collating the 3-4 operators that seem to get use. I don't know. I think these meetings have had some sort of hard to put your finger on value, reading between the lines. Cyril contributed some stuff to the configuration management stuff we have, and I'm more aware of more operators. I hadn't seen the Cassandra one before. So, I mean, yeah, I would like there to be something tangible that comes out of this, but I think it's easy to sort of just throw your hands up and be well, I can't yum install Cassandra operator, so it's been terrible. It's not really the truth, but anyway.
Just to bring it to speed, Jim, I don't know if you saw, I put out a couple started a thread, discussed thread on the Cassandra dev list, and just asking a few questions. The first, and we're discussing the first of those, which is, do people feel it still is worthwhile and makes sense to try to pursue a single community-based operator project?
I saw that. I saw your that email, but I didn't see the reaction, or I figured it would be discussed today. And sorry, I had another meeting for the first 10 minutes, but I've kind of danced all over with this. I think there would be some value. I don't know, from watching the 4.0 push, kind of every couple weeks I read through the dev list. I don't know. It seems like there's no bandwidth, like, to push it through that channel. Like, if it's an ASF thing, then it needs to almost be like wasn't there some like kind of related projects that were donated as like a separate top level ASF thing? I don't know. I'm sort of a big, I don't know. I've seen there's a bunch of different really good viewpoints here. Like, some folks are like, oh, to use my other operator, not the one I'm working on, but that's fine. You should come with like your own CI/CD pipeline and be ready to make Docker images. And that is like very different from what we've been aiming at DataStax. So, and I don't say that's wrong. I just wonder how easy it'll be to see a lot of usage there. But then I look at the project, I'm like, oh, there's like a tradition of this in the project, and maybe I get it now. And it is true, if you have like very specific, like, we only trust the JVM built by company X at version Y, like, it's really hard to make a one size fits all thing. Like, I don't know. I would like to see like some cooperation and make something that's a shared, like, something everyone feels like they have some ownership over, instead of like, oh, well, come look at my Git repo and like I'll copy some code out to yours, and like, oh, like, let's go over. Like, I wanted to talk a few weeks ago about networking things, and I didn't know if CASCOP had any cool networking things. I was gonna ask some questions. So these kind of like coffee meetups over my late lunchtime are great too. Whatever we can do, I would like to help.
Before I sent out the email yesterday, I talked with Patrick briefly, and he, unfortunately he's not here, but he put out the second or the last question that I put in the email of, maybe it's worthwhile to consider broadening the scope to just, not just specifically an operator project, and it's just more generally with running Cassandra in Kubernetes, and I certainly see merit in that. I mean, for example, if somebody is trying to just get up and running with Cassandra in Kubernetes and struggling and trying to look to figure out, for resources and where to go, I think it's great if they're funneled into, or they know, hey, I can go on, the ASF Slack because I've got Cassandra channels, and whether the question is like, oh, they want to use CASCOP, and they put a question on there, and I can say, well, I don't know, but you know what, one of the people that develop, the main developers on CASCOP hang out here, so you can ask here, versus, well, let me go search Kubernetes Slack and the 1,000 of channels on their Slack, and which I've done in the past, where post questions and then they just go off into the ether and don't get responses. So I certainly see value in in that, or is it even aside from the operator? It's like, well, and I've got questions about, okay, how to do these operations, how to application development, being able to help with the community there. But it sounds like there's still certainly some consensus around a unified project.
Yeah, well, I think I wanted to kind of expand on what Cyril was mentioning, is that if we I think, Cyril, you were talking about this intelligent operations, right, which is like a higher order operator feature. If we think about it as, okay, do we have just like the canonical, when I say canonical, like canon means law, right? So like, what is the canonical way that the Cassandra community does Cassandra on Docker, which is level 0? What is the canonical way that Cassandra on Kubernetes is done at level 1, 2, and 3? And there may be different operators that operate at higher levels, but at least there's a sequence of events that they can, sequence of whatever, README files or some page. It doesn't really matter. It could be a GitHub page. It doesn't really matter what, but sequential, right? Google is sequential for what you search for it. So you get 50 different things if you ask 50 different questions. So, you know, that's what I think as an end user complainer is, what can I follow as a sequence of steps, you know? And ideally it could be use Cascop for this, you know, use the Alexander one for this if you're using Alexander or whatever, but like you can at least follow a sequence of events, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what you want, this is what you do. Apart from this group, I don't think everybody understands what the capabilities of each of the operators are, like compared to each other. I don't think anybody knows that.
Maybe related to this, do we think there's like a, sorry, let me fix that. Do we think there's, I've noticed this, if you're coming with a lot of Kubernetes expertise, you're like, oh, there's an operator for that. I'll throw it in and get to operating. You know, I trust operators. Like, that's the way I do things in Kubernetes. If you're coming from like a stronger, maybe, you know, bare metal servers or VMs background, you're probably been using like Chef, Ansible, Puppet, SaltStack, something like that for some recent years. And like now you're starting to get more likely to encounter Kubernetes, and you're like, how do I find something that's like what I know? And it's probably like a Helm chart, and Helm chart's probably good. And John and I have talked about this many times, how like, yeah, level 0 is just like, beat that Helm chart. Like if we could make an operator that beat the Bitnami Helm chart, not, you know, whatever that means, but just like has a little more features, is as easy to use, gets uptake from people using that Helm chart or people who would use a Helm chart otherwise, that's a win. And that's way less featureful than we've all been working on. So saying like, this is the canonical way, I think, yeah, it's sort of tough, but maybe we have something for both of those audiences.
Yeah, I think there's be a lot of companies kind of in the position that, you know, we're kind of in Apple where we have this big giant fleet of bare metal, and you know, we want to do more in Kubernetes, and like, yeah, well, how do we get started? And a lot of what we're doing is kind of applying what we have in our existing world into the Kubernetes world, and some of that doesn't fit, and like it kind of creates toil in some ways because we're trying to apply what works here in a completely different place, and like that's a struggle. I think a lot of people are gonna. It's a common struggle that I think a lot of us are gonna have to go through. I think so. I think definitely having some guidance around that would be good. I mean, I think just even having this thing is a good place for that, because there'll be more people experiencing this, and you know, having the Slack channel and stuff. But totally.
So I'm kind of making an outline. What I see is like, first we have tools. We have the operators, right? And then before that, I think Jim, you mentioned that, you know, we have Helm charts, plural. I think the next is the community, which is you can just come to the Cassandra Kubernetes channel and talk to people. And I think the next thing after that is the documentation. And then I think then we can start to think about what does the official one look like, if there is one, you know? I mean, before having the canonical documentation, and this is what I feel, this is just my experience, is that I'm a big proponent of, you know, read the fucking manual, right? So, but if you don't have the manual to begin with, then and so I believe in like documentation-driven software development, meaning let's write the documentation first. What is the ideal way that this software should be installed and used and so on? And then we can test back and see if it actually works like that, right? So it's like test-driven development, but it's for admins who are basically going to be reading a document and installing it or doing something. And if we have a clear like idea of what that could be for level 0, level 1, level 2, it could be used and implemented today with the current operators well in advance of an official operator ever coming out, because it would just be a checklist, right?
I think it's so. I think we've sort of done that, not from the standpoint of maybe the documentation, but with the design docs for the common CRD, and because the docs, there's common things pulled from the different operators in at least what's there. So it's not, if any of the projects said, well, okay, if we're going to say here's a reference CRD that we're going to implement, just a little bit that's there, I think it might require changes, at least some change in each of the projects. And that wasn't the goal of it, but of that exercise. But we lost, I felt like that effort was, while it was definitely helpful and worthwhile, I feel like we were starting to lose momentum with that, and losing momentum, losing interest, and I think we end up, right at square one where we were all along, which is we have, there are existing mature projects already used in production, and so we could go, and it certainly from a user standpoint, I agree, it'd be really helpful to document here was what you'd expect for level 0 and level 1, and maybe that is a good next step, and that could be, maybe people could work to get stuff added to the Cassandra site docs. So maybe there's we could somewhere in the docs something added with references to the various operators, and some sort of feature comparison. So that would be seems like that would make sense. Well, let me see, not necessarily a feature comparison, but like you said, more from the standpoint of, okay, here's what we've discussed as a community in the community meetings and on Slack, what you'd expect for level 0, level 1, and here's what each of these operators, and have people fill in what they support. I think it would certainly be beneficial for users when they're trying to find what functionality the various operators support.
I apologize, I gotta drop it. It was very nice talking to you all, and looking forward to working with you guys some more.
See you, Andy.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah.
Hey, John, I was gonna say that I've done a bit of that kind of scrounging around already, so I can take a stab at just starting a Google Doc for this, right? Like, if it doesn't make sense to make it a blog post on Cassandra.Apache, which again is more authoritative than like to my blog or somebody else's blog, or is it a section in getting started with Cassandra? And there's all conversation about documentation that's happening on the dev channel right now about how to generate docs and stuff. So I can start that Google Doc right now, and I'll share it. And let's just kind of see we have a Google Doc right now, I believe, on the SIG, but that's more of the design doc, right? It's not documentation that an end user would read, correct?
Yeah, definitely not oriented towards end user.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do we think there's a place for some idea like Kubernetes savviness to be looped in here? Or no?
Should you repeat that again, Jim?
Yeah, do you think there's some place for, I like what we're talking about, but do you think there's some place to loop in the level of like how familiar, like there's going to be people who want to barely learn Kubernetes, or like they're like, I'm just using Kubernetes because it's like being pushed through by management, right? And then there's other people who are like, I want to open the Go code or whatever language code and like change this, and like I've written my own operator before, right? And I think we're seeing like both folks show up and leave GitHub issues with our stuff, and sometimes you're like helping them with really kind of basic Kubernetes administration skills, and other times it's like much more knowing the internals of Cassandra. So I don't know. I think there's some sort of place for this in documenting or helping guide people towards something they're likely to get some use out of soon, instead of being like, okay, step one, learn how to code Go, and like go look at Kubernetes source, then go look at this operator. That's crazy talk, right? It's like, anyway.
Yeah, that's a good distinction of like what the audience is, right? Because, you know, I talked to Cedric, who does the workshops for data stacks, and he's like, 80% of the people are college kids that have no idea what a database is. You know? And I was like, oh, wow, I had no idea. So I'm being kind of biased here, but, you know, if somebody has done Cassandra development, right, they have some understanding of the architecture. Like, you can't be a Cassandra developer and not kind of understand a little bit of the architecture. If you're an operator, you know, you may not necessarily know how to use drivers, but you understand the table structure, but you also understand the architecture. So I think it's fair to assume that if somebody is going from Cassandra on bare metal or VM to Docker and Kubernetes, at some point in their life cycle of different clusters, they've encountered things like Ansible or encountered things like Terraform. They understand automation. So I think that's my like level. It's like they know Cassandra architecture, like nodes, data centers, et cetera, and they understand some automation. They may not understand Docker and they may not understand Kubernetes, but they at least understand some automation.
So do we think it's trying to identify and document levels of functionality? And when I say document, well, with the end goal of that being documented somewhere in the Cassandra docs and the Cassandra site, is that, and having references to various operator projects? People feel like that's worthwhile.
Yeah, and it could be done two ways. It could be a blog post style thing where it's not part of the docs initially, and then it could be eventually like getting started, right? Getting started on Docker, getting started on, you know, whatever, getting started on Kubernetes. I think making it way into the there's two sides of docs, right? There's the Cassandra entry docs, and then there's the website, which part of it, there's some overlap. The blog is definitely part of the website source tree. It's easier to get stuff done in the website source tree than it is to get done in the entry docs. Like that's the thing that, you know, we should be aware of. I think Jim, you mentioned it. Like the time it takes to get things done in the general flow of the devs is onerous.
Yeah, I can appreciate it. You know, at work I'm spinning too many plates right now, so I can appreciate that it's like, I just wanted to focus on this thing, and now you're asking me to like pick up my attention and place it elsewhere and like code review stuff. And I actually asked this question when we started having it, like way back in meeting 1 or 2 when Patrick started these. It's like, I think I understood like the Apache way is not to publish something like an Ansible playbook, but that's pretty rough too. Like, and an operator is just like a very advanced one, right? So it's like, why did we not, why did the project not do these kind of preliminary things?
Yeah, you see that in plenty of projects. Well, you go down to the least common denominator, and then everyone suffers equally.
Yeah. I just shared the outline on the Google Doc. You guys just request access. I feel wary about making it a completely public editable link. But, it's in my best interest to make this like, getting started on Kubernetes. So, I'll continue to work on this part. And if it ends up being something worthy of putting on the Cassandra blog or the docs, it's even better. There are tons of articles that I've collected on Cassandra and Kubernetes, at least 10 good ones. So we're not really starting from scratch. John has a lot of really good ones. So I think, there's a lot of it going to be like, okay, read this, read this, read this. Another question I had, I think this relates to the CRD, is like, I brought up a thing about, what are the reference architectures that we would expect people to do? And it was like, one data center, single region, single cluster, multiple region, things like that. What is the goal? And I was really curious to see what, Andy had to say about it. Like, but what would be the goal for a realistic user? Would it be multiple clouds, or would it just be multi-region in one cloud, or would it be on, just on premise? I mean, technically it doesn't really matter, but what does the topology look like? Because that's the thing that you want to build towards, to say, okay, we explained to you what Cassandra is on Kubernetes. Let's do this now.
I know there's a lot of people out there who will say, we really need this to do multi-region, but I feel like they're setting such a high bar to like get invested that, I don't know, I've worked for companies that also said like, oh, all of our product recommendations are done with AI. It's like, there was no actual AI there, but it was just sort of like this, we have to set the bar very high. And like, then at the end of the day, it's like, so it's a little different because it's about, safety of your data, but I don't know. I think for someone starting, if they're not already Kubernetes experts, asking them to now be the manager of multiple Kubernetes clusters that work in concert is a little bit much, as like you're aiming to hit this. It's like, just get good at one cluster, and one cluster per environment, your dev environment, your test environment, your product. Like, that's probably similar to how you had your bare metal setup. Maybe it's been a while since I bare metal, but there was some time when I did.
I've seen both ends where you have experienced Cassandra operators with little or no experience with Kubernetes, and trying to figure out how to navigate things. And then when I've been on the other end, where developing an application that was getting and having to support an application that was being deployed in Kubernetes, and the operators knew nothing about Cassandra, but were Kubernetes admins, and so seeing it, both ways. And then those admins taking the liberty to say, well, we need to do, treating it like Cassandra, like they would other applications they were managing, and it was turned out like you would expect. Not well for me.
I'm curious what you found from Cascop users or just Orange internally, Cyril.
Sorry, I missed the question. Can you ask it again?
Like, what's the target bar to like say, like, here, we're going to give you like a pretty good tutorial to get you into production. Like, what should production be? Should it be multi-region? Should it be multiple Kubernetes clusters, one Kubernetes cluster, like one rack, multi-rack, like whatever, like what's the topology was what Raul said.
Yeah, I mean, the development of Cascap was based on production requirements, and they include, like you said, multi-regions. I mean, multi-data centers, one in south of France and one in north of France. That's why we create multi-Cascap. But other than that, yeah, we need to be able to operate the cluster as the current one that they have on prod. So meaning being able to scale up, scale down, doing ring restart, running repairs, doing backups and restores. That's most of it. We implemented some intelligence at the operator level, like, not being able to decommission a data center if there are still bases replicated to that data center. Things like, yeah, like I was saying before, trying to avoid anyone from having to like get in a pod and doing anything that we couldn't trace later if something happens.
That's a good question that I have, Dan, is that related to tracing, right? What part of, the official Kubernetes operator or the precursive steps of documentation should we talk about? Oh, by the way, you probably should get Elk running, and you should probably have Prometheus and Grafana running to know what the heck is going on, right? Like, if you're a Kubernetes admin, you kind of know this already. It's a foregone conclusion. You're going to have to do this stuff, DevOps-wise. But I'm wondering if it makes sense to be like, okay, by the way, here's an aside. Make sure you have these things in place.
Yeah, I think we've seen that where customers have talked to us a little bit, although I'm saying this as like a very telephone game thing. So the more, like you said, if you're familiar with Kubernetes, you're going to have like a practice, and it's like, oh, how do you plug into my good established practices? And if it's more of like, what do people call this? Like digital transformation or whatever. It's like, oh, I have VMs and like I've heard they're lame. Like I got to add Kubernetes, and then they don't really know. They know what databases they're using, and Cassandra's one of them. So they're like, okay, cool. Like, where do I get the logs? It's like, well, you need to set up logging infrastructure. It's like, what is that? Like, I can't just SSH in and get them.
I feel like if you are doing that kind of digital transformation thing, you're probably not going with like self-hosted, like Kelsey Hightower, do it the hard way Kubernetes. Like, you're probably using Stackdriver, or you should be using Stackdriver. You're probably using CloudWatch logs for all of your pod logging, or you should be using CloudWatch logs for all of your pod logging.
Yeah, you're totally right. A friend of mine, this company was talking about switching over to Kubernetes. They're not Cassandra users, but it's like, what should we do? I was like, absolutely start with a managed Kubernetes and get good at that, because it's going to be much harder. And you'll just waste your cycles on maintaining Kubernetes masters. You won't even get to the stuff you want to work on if you're rolling your own.
Something else that I've talked about the like Helm. People using Helm to deploy and looking at that maybe as a baseline. There's probably more usage of that, and I think, well, hopefully you'll see people say, well, you can get so far with that, and especially if it's it's documented, the functionality, and say, okay, well, now I want to transition over to using one of these operators. How do I do that? And I had a conversation along those lines with an internal team. They weren't using a Helm operator, but they had rolled their stuff by hand, and it was just getting to be too much of a maintenance burden. And so they're already running Cassandra in Kubernetes, but then they were looking to figure out how to migrate over to using the operator. And I think that's curious. That's something else that's something else that may be worth keeping an eye on.
Has anybody used the Helm Operator SDK?
The Helm Operator.
Yeah, the Helm Operator. Well, it's like, you can make, using the Operator SDK, you can use Ansible, Helm, or yeah, that, I'm talking about that, yeah.
There's a different thing called the Helm Operator, which we have looked at. So we did not use that. I think both Cass Operator and Cascop are both Operator SDK, and maybe InstaCluster Operator is as well.
I'm not sure for the last one. It might be a Cube Builder directly. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we've also built another operator with Cube Builder. I think, yeah, maybe the Helm mode of Operator SDK. There's an Ansible mode too. I wondered if it would even be possible to get something for Cassandra working with that, because all the best practices require some pretty quirky stuff to get nodes coming up one at a time. I mean, probably most of it's possible, and then the hardest 20 or 30% is like, how are you doing this? And then you kind of like jam it all in it container. You have to kind of come up with some workaround.
I mean, the thing with Ansible, right, is it's it's kind of based on these like roles, tasks, and playbooks. Technically, if you already have the tasks mapped out or the tasks done, then the same kind of tasks can work on a VM-based cluster, potentially with like a Kubernetes-based cluster, because it's just Cassandra operations that you're doing there. So like node tool drain, right? Like that's something that's happening at the node level. It doesn't really matter. I've used Ansible. I like it better than, let's say, Chef or Puppet, but that's just me. I've used Terraform. I like it better than Ansible for infrastructure. I think there's a specific strength for Ansible in what it does. There's a strength for Helm for what it does, and then there's literal Go-based or Java-based Kubernetes operators, because there's nothing else, right, that we can use to do those intelligent operations. But I think that like levels 1, 2, maybe even 3 can be done with Helm and Ansible, just because I'm like looking at the capabilities. Not that I think we should do it. I'm just saying it's possible.
Yeah, I would guess you're right, and that's what I thought looking at the one the Kudo developers made too. And I talked to I think his name was Zane for a while on the ASF Slack about this, and I was like, so I looked through the code, but I'm like, but where, if the whole operator, your operator is just YAML, so like, what does that mean? Like, how do I have like conditional logic, and how do I loop over things? And he explained like, well, you need to add an init container, and we add this thing, and like, so you do end up writing some Go code snippets that are smaller and do very singular things, kind of like the Unix philosophy. And I was like, okay, that sounds really cool. Like, I'm gonna go look for that the next time I look into Kudo.
Yeah, it seems to be a bunch of microservices or micro batch or whatever you call them that you glue together. Except there are things that you can't really do. I think at the moment, I started to talk about it, like how do I query a node to get its state and know that the decommission is done, or things like this. And it seems that they have a ticket to implement some HTTP call directly in the template model or something like this. But it's, yeah. And even if, what if the operator, fails? Yeah, I don't know what to do. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like the level, I totally agree. It's like the level 1, 2, 3 is like, Helm chart plus plus. Like it's really not a lot more. But I guess I will say, like, this is something I feel like we spend a lot of time on. It's like, how will somebody digest this without understanding all of your code? And the CRD is a great concept for that. Like, I think that was a major hit by Kubernetes developers, because yeah, like for example, we added in a recent release this host networking flag. So that kind of very simply translates to flip host networking on the pod. But it also means you have, like, for variety, you have to flip some DNS settings. So Cassandra is okay with that. You might want to flip a Cassandra config because you know the host's IP now, things like that. So it's nice to not make users go through the guts and like toggle all 4 of these things if you want to use this feature, right? So it's like simpler controls. I think that's kind of the reason why I'm like, I like these other approaches, but I'm like, but I still like the approach I've been working on, because I think it would be easy enough to use without learning all of the details necessarily.
I mean, I think what you're suggesting is like, well, it's not exactly a dummy's guide, but it's like, if you wanted to get started, most people, well, there's an old conversation about, you know, certain settings in the Cassandra YAML that haven't been changed in 8 years. So, you know, there's a whole problem with that. You know, most of the time, let's say when installing Cassandra or whatever on a VM, you know, you do a bunch of things at the system level, and you go through and you know, what's his name? He'll come to me, but like, you know, John, for example, JON has this like 10 things you should do with every Cassandra cluster, right? Well, if we bake that in, then it's like, hey, you're already doing the best practice.
Totally. Yep.
You can tell them about it.
Yeah, you can get the best practices in by being like, do you want best practices? Yes. Moving on. Like that's what I find so powerful about Kubernetes. I've been trying to get some more developers using it at work, and from not being familiar with it, but knowing like the entire JVM inside and out, I think they're starting to see what's powerful, where it's like, you know, I can kind of deploy a whole fleet of things, and some really hard stuff becomes simple. Now some simple stuff sadly became harder, but it's the same, you know, it's the same with AWS. It's like, if you don't just like yum install, like you have to go set some security groups, you have to set up some other, you know, system level Linux stuff. You know, it's just not ever as easy as that 5-minute tutorial makes it look. So, but anyway, yeah, that's where I think giving people a nice start is doing them a service. And then if they want to come back and learn all the details and go into the weeds and tweak all these best practices how they see fit, makes sense.
I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, so just I want to circle back. So Raul, you've created the doc, and which I haven't opened up yet, and so is the plan then to try to hash out level 0, level 1, at least as a starting point, and then figure out where in Cassandra, you said whether blog or whether, you know, where it would be the most practical place to try to get stuff documented, and people, and I'd encourage anyone who's got any of the, you know, operator projects to participate and, you know, put that out on the user dev mailing list, Slack, try to consolidate some of that information for people.
Before we wrap up, I had a quick question. Is anybody running Cassandra on Istio right now at all? Are y'all using Istio?
So we tried. Yeah, we tried because, so we didn't want to implement SSL encryption at Cassandra's level. And we wanted to be able to leverage Istio to do it across the board, so on any other software layer. We had issues with being able to, with the gossip protocol, because any Cassandra node needs to talk to itself, and it goes through the proxy, and there's a dead end somewhere. They were supposed to fix it, and last time I tried, some of it was working, but not completely. So I don't know where they are at. But last time, like I think less than 2 weeks ago, I checked. Somebody else was still complaining. So yeah.
Just like a headless, like a service, like a headless service thing, or were you trying with a headless service or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Crap. Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
we also look into Linkerd too, but they don't support all TCP.
Yeah, I tried Linkerd and
Yeah.
I like what they're doing, but it doesn't work today.
I talked to them like a year ago, and they said that was on their roadmap. And last time I checked, it's still up there.
Cassandra needs very specific networking. This is what I was mentioning before. Cassandra needs very specific networking stuff, because I don't even know how to articulate it. But it's like for the internode, it's like node A connects to node B, and then node B connects back to node A. So like you can't do any kind of IP shenanigans.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I haven't had luck with the service meshes.
Yeah.
And node A needs to talk to node A.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Thanks much for that feedback. I'll keep banging on it, I guess, maybe.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording since we're at the top of the hour.